Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
What's the most unexpected thing someone did on a date that made you instantly like them? We had met through his brother, who I'd met on a Yahoo chat room. We'd IM'd at first, then via email and phone for weeks, so we had an easy rapport. We planned to meet in October, once he got settled at college and I had more time, since I was finishing high school and had 3 jobs. He moved into his dorm the day before and had a million things to do, and it was a significant risk for him. We lived 5 hours apart. He'd never even visited my state before, and he was very shy in person. That morning, he went to the campus store to buy a phone card to call me, and just decided he couldn't wait anymore. He sent me an IM and an email that he was coming. He knew I was off that night and asked me to meet him at my house. It was so spontaneous and not like him. I loved it. He had MapQuest directions and printed directions everywhere, from his dorm to my house, then from my house to the mall, and he wouldn't let me look at any others. We just instantly got each other. I'd never felt so compatible with someone. When we went to dinner, I remembered he'd said he liked to call ahead and order at restaurants, so he didn't have to order in person because it made him anxious. I asked him what he was thinking of getting, and when the waiter came to get our drink order, I ordered drinks and dinner for both of us at the same time. He looked so surprised, relieved, and then happy. We held hands throughout dinner, and when my dinner came, I moved to his side of the booth so we could be as close as possible. After dinner, I figured he'd just take me home since he had a 5-hour drive that night. He had a school meeting at 6 a.m. Instead, he'd printed directions from the restaurant to my favorite park, one I talked about on the phone because I love rose gardens. He walked me around the garden, the swan pond, and pushed me on swings. He got this funny look on his face and told me to wait. He ran back to the car and got a rose bouquet out of his trunk that he'd forgotten to give me when he picked me up. We'd just looked at all of these beautiful roses, and this bouquet, he looked embarrassed to hand, had been in the trunk all day, in the summer. They were so wilted that the stems were rubbery, and the petals were mostly gone. I couldn't stop laughing, then he couldn't stop laughing. I kissed him, and it felt like we were 2 puzzle pieces that just snapped into place. When I was getting out, he had another surprise for me. I'd seen this band opening at Tattoo the Earth a few weeks prior, and I was so impressed by them. They had cassette singles they gave out at the concert. I'd met a couple of the band members, and I was obsessed. I told him I needed the album when it came out and gushed about how amazing they were. They didn't have an album yet, so he'd called Hastings in his college town and asked them to order 2 CDs, so they'd have them on release day. The release date was that morning, so he'd stopped by and picked them up before he came into town. It was Mulvane's LD50. He handed me the CD and we both cried because I was impressed by it. Amazing that he would go through the trouble, but also that he wanted the CD too, because he valued my opinion on music. We were happy and miserable because we knew he had to drive back and we wouldn't see each other for weeks. I opened the door and he blurted, "I love you." "I'm sorry, I definitely didn't plan to say that." "I'm sorry." I told him I loved him, too, and we hugged and kissed and cried. Eventually we got out and cuddled on my couch watching Jerry Springer at night, and he left with just enough time to get home, shower, and get to his meeting. I knew he was the one, and I was right. We got married on the 4-year anniversary of that day, in the rose garden we walked through that night. It was the best date I ever had. We actually didn't start dating for about 6 months, because we both thought the other person was in a relationship, but my now husband posted in our local Reddit social group about hosting a party to watch the landing of the Mars Curiosity rover back in August 2012. It was an open invite even though we hadn't met. We had mutual friends in common, and when I showed up, not only was he fun and kind and smart, but his flat was clean. He brewed his own beer, and he had the most adorable dog. When I found out he was single, I asked him out for drinks, and now we live in Germany with 2 dogs. One, that same black lab he had then, he's 13 now, and a cat, and our kiddo is about to start primary school. It was our first date. I arrived early and decided to walk over to the bookstore to grab a book while waiting for him. Turned out he was even earlier than me. I remember him jogging after me calling my name. Later that night when our date ended, I ended up missing the last bus because I had enjoyed talking to him so much. Called my parents to ask for a ride because I was in a knee and at the time I lived on the other side of town. They refused. He, despite his brakes being shot, drove me home. Then, walked me to my front door and gave me his windbreaker because he was concerned 70 degrees was too cold for me. 16 years later, he still worries that 70 degrees is too cold for me and our son. We met online and our first date was me flying into NYC for a few days to meet up with him after talking for about a month or so. At one point, I had offhandedly mentioned that flowers were wasted on me, and someone could get the same results with a burger from McDonald's. It was a passing comment, and while true, it was a joke. He met me at the airport with a cheeseburger and some fries from his favorite spot. They were cold because he was so nervous he got there super early. We just celebrated our 4-year anniversary a few days ago. I was planning to meet up with a guy from Tinder. We planned to meet at a mall, but when I was halfway there, I realized the mall closed early because of COVID. This was September of 2020. Asked what he wanted to do. He told me to come over to his place if I felt comfortable with that. Keep in mind, I was dressed to get lucky. Nails done, makeup done, and I wore my most booby dress. Get to his place and we are chatting and laughing, just having a really wonderful time. He turned to me and said, I was planning on just hooking up with you, but I'm really enjoying getting to know you. Are you okay with waiting? Yes. Such a green flag. I was going through a lot and most men I would just have sex with and never hear from again. We waited till our 3rd date and let me tell you, it was worth the wait. Got married in May of this year and couldn't be happier. This was kind of a combo of unexpected for both of us, but on our first date, he picked me up from my parents' house. We were talking about where we grew up and I started going into a long explanation of where the house I grew up in was. You know, the same house he just picked me up from. The unexpected thing he did was just how he happily looked at me, half smiling, waiting for me to realize, but there was nothing mean about it. He thought it was cute. He coined the term adorkable for me that night, and that word made it into our wedding vows. My now husband invited me to a work Christmas party as his date, and this was the 2nd time we went out. We got really drunk off wine and decided to crash the night at his friend's place close by. My friend only had one extra bed, so we slept on the same bed, and when I woke up in the morning, I saw that he had put a pillow between us. I realized that if he tried doing something that night, I probably wouldn't have said no because I was in a really happy drunk state. When I saw the pillow, I smiled and felt a lot of respect for him. He then got me breakfast and drove 30 minutes to drop me home. We've been married 6 years, and he's been the same respectful sweetheart. I feel so lucky. I love reading fantasy, and he casually asked me my favorite author on one of our first dates. Pretty normal questions, so I told him, not expecting him to commit it to memory. The next time I saw him, he handed me 2 books he had bought. He had gone to a small bookstore and asked the proprietor for recommendations based on my favorite author, who was quite vague and not well known. Terrible books. The bookstore clerk probably had no idea what he was talking about, but the gesture was amazing. We'd been dating for a while, and as a date, he helped me declutter my place and I ordered us pizza to say thanks for the help. During the declutter, I found some of my old school art projects / awards and such that I had done as a kid, the kind of stuff your parents keep. I remember saying, I don't want these for myself. These are meant to be with people who love me, not me. And I tossed them in the recycling bin reluctantly. Fast forward a few months later, and we were rummaging about with his stuff, and I found my art projects. I asked him why he had them, and he said, I could tell they were special to you, and I wanted them to be with someone who loves you. It was a side of him I hadn't seen until that moment. We've been together almost 8 years. Baby number 2 on the way. Life is beautiful. I married my best friend. Oh dear. My late husband had moved out and I needed help taking care of my dog rescue and the old home I was living in. He was the second guy to apply. I told him to call me on Saturday when he wanted to interview. I dropped my cell phone in soapy mop water and it was in rice for a few days. He never called. He showed up with his 2 children unannounced and explained he understood my phone had probably taken a plunge. He was younger than me and good-looking and overweight. I've never dated someone overweight, so there wasn't even a concern. I had been married 30 years and wasn't even thinking about dating. He moved in, and strangely enough, he started just fixing things. I never asked him to. He just kept doing things to make my life better. And he also called me by my first name. I had been Mom and Honey for so long, I found it weird and comforting. His friend was playing at a local dive and my UK friend, and I went with him to wait for his wife. They were separated. He really wanted things to work out with his wife. I was pumping up my friend to flirt with him to make his wife jealous. I was trying to tell her some things about him so it would look like they were dating. I found myself saying, he's super hot when he makes omelets for his kids. It was a loud bar and I was trying to tell him something. And in to yell in his ear and I got zapped by electricity. He was the only thing I could think about for weeks. So, I started avoiding him. I am 13 years older than he. When I came back from a short trip he found me and accused me of avoiding him. I told him was. He kept inviting me for a drink and I kept saying no. Finally, I gave in and said, I'll go out with you as long as you take me to every dive bar on the boulevard. We hit all 6 and got kicked out of the last because he jumped balls on the pool table. It wasn't early when we got back home, but the sky was clear. He asked me if I wanted to go up on the roof with a telescope. I grabbed a hoodie and met him at the ladder. He had chairs and a 6-pack cooler. We stayed awake and talked until almost dawn. 12 years later and many difficulties, we bought a house together last year and plan to get married. I'm 60. He's 47. I had lost my last phone charger, and it was on about 5% when we met up. I asked him if he happened to have one that would fit. He didn't, so I moved on in the conversation as we drove. Then he pulls into a Dollar General and says, just want to stop inside really quick. Want to join? It's Dollar General, so, duh. We walk around, talk a bit. He leads me to the chargers, grabs one, grabs 2 of my favorite snacks I had mentioned before and my favorite drink. Then took me out for hot wings and beer at a place where we could charge my phone. That was 8 years ago. We have a 5-year-old, another on the way, and he still always gets those petty things I either always forget or justify not buying for myself. He makes sure we never go without and never expects a thank you. Just a great man. One of our first restaurant dates, my husband and I went till I got to the table with him and the host who brought us to our table, and he moved around me. I didn't know what he was doing, and he pulled my chair out for me. I was wearing a pretty long flowy skirt, and he helped me move the skirt to the front of me so it wouldn't get caught in the chair. We were eating for a while until I decided I needed to go to the restroom. I excused myself, and he got up when I stood up and helped me off the chair because I was also wearing heels, which I don't wear anymore, and they were too high for me. I was already walking like a baby deer, lol. I was kind of embarrassed by it, but he said he didn't mind because he got to go arm in arm in the car because I was like, crying face, I can't walk. He didn't laugh or think it was funny or anything. He drove me to the nearest shoe store and bought me nice flats without really saying anything. Just told me to rest my feet while he went inside and got me some nice flats. The part that impressed me, really, was that he got shoes that actually matched my outfit better than the heels that I was wearing that evening, lol. We had been friends for a while and always had this chemistry. When we finally went on a date, he sat on the same side of the booth as me. It wasn't anything I've ever had a date do before or that I've done myself, but it let us sit really close and practically whisper the entire time. It just felt incredibly sweet and romantic. We're married now, have been together going on 6 years now, and we still ask for booths so we can sit together. Our favorite restaurant started sitting us at their chip tables, which are basically one-sided booths with a view. They noticed our preference after the first couple of times and just leaned fully into it. We go there to celebrate literally all our anniversaries, first date, when we became exclusive, engagement, and wedding, because the service is phenomenal and the steaks are absolutely amazing. We had been sort of seeing each other for a few months, more like an exclusive fob situation. Hadn't even made it official. I was having some issues with my roommate at the time, and it culminated in her ruining a Halloween party I had planned for a bunch of friends. I had food bought, an apartment decorated, and everything. She decided her friends would pregame before going out to some club and ruined everything, ate all our food, drank all our liquor before I even got home from work. He was driving me to and from work because my car had recently stopped working. I stood there in my living room with him trying not to cry, and he just looked at me and said, "You want to get out here?" I nodded, still trying not to cry. Then he repeated himself. "No, I mean, do you want to get outye here?" With a look. I thought for a minute and said absolutely. I went and packed some stuff really quickly and moved into his apartment that night. We walked in his front door and he said, "Hey guys, my girlfriend's going to be staying here a while. Cool?" We were all already friends. They were all supposed to be at my party. So it worked out well in the end. That was the first time he called me his girlfriend. We've been married 12 years and are finally expecting our first baby. My BF had our third date all planned. He went all out. Detailed scavenger hunt with petty things that we both had always loved. He had planned it for a long time. He had other people involved and had confirmed with me for a week about me making sure I could make it. On day of, I called him and told him my little brother was playing in a post-season HS football game and I wanted to go watch him with my family. He said, "I'll see you there." He said, "If things go how I plan, your little brother will be my little brother too someday." On the third date, total splush. That night at the football game, he never even told me how many things he planned and had to cancel. He was charming, way overdressed for the original date, but didn't even let it faze him. He talked to my mom all night, and we had the best time. He is now my husband of 22 years and my mother's favorite child. Haha. When I was on the first date with my current boyfriend, I received a text from a friend of my mom's asking if I had heard from her recently. Her friend said they usually talk every day, but hadn't heard from her in 2 days. I realized I had also not spoken with her in a few days. I texted and called her with no response. I immediately became worried something had happened. She lives alone. My now BF sat down with me and worked out our options. At one point, he offered to drive me to her house to check on her. She lives over an hour away. Thankfully, she eventually got back to me, but his offering to put our date on hold and drive me over an hour on the off chance my mom wasn't okay said a lot about his character. On the first date, we went ice skating. I had never been before. Roller skated for years, but never on ice. fell on my butt, and instead of turning and yanking my arm like most people would do, he spun around quickly behind me, gracefully and swiftly bringing me to my feet, asked me if I was okay, and dusted me off. I was stunned at how easily he stood me up and swept me off my feet. We have now been together almost 10 wonderful years. After a long-term relationship ended, I booked a solo vacation to Costa Rica. When I planned it, I was imagining it as a get my groove back trip, if you know what I mean. I casually mentioned it was coming up to someone on a first date. I jokingly told him he should meet me there, and he did. So, our first date was dinner, and our second date was a week in Costa Rica together. We didn't even know each other's last names at that point. Thank God he wasn't an axe murderer that I know of, because we got married a few years later. I took my husband out for a nice birthday dinner early on in our date. During the meal, he went over and spoke quietly with the owner. Puzzled, I asked him what was going on, and at first he wouldn't say. Then he discreetly pointed at an elderly couple at a nearby table and explained that he had asked for their check when they were finished. He said it was just something he did on his birthday ever since he got his first job at 16. I realized at that moment that I was dating a good man. Swoon. He had recently moved into a high-rise apartment unit with a balcony. It was our third date, so I came over and he cooked us dinner. Swoon in itself watching him cook for me. Anyways, after dinner we went to go sit out on the balcony and watch the sunset. He went out first, reached out for my hand, and basically spun me into him, so he had his back on the open rail and was holding me. We're both afraid of heights, and it was extremely high up, so I asked if it bothered him to feel so close to the edge like that, and he goes, "I'd do anything to make you feel safe." I went on a date with someone, and I was not sure if I would be attracted to them when I saw them in person. But as we parted, he told me that they liked me and would like to see me again. It just felt old school. The date I had prior to this person a few weeks walked me to my car, said he had had a wonderful time, and we should arrange something, and then did not contact me. Also, with online dating in general, there is so much unclear and slow communication. I found that with my recent date, the simple act of being clear and me knowing where I stood made me consider another date. During the time I was getting to know this guy, he was always clear about me, which was actually really nice.
I used to love sending my, now wife, then girlfriend, to work with homemade lunches, and she would send me texts every lunch about how amazing they were. She also just tended to not eat when I didn't make her lunch, so it was like a double whammy of goodness. I love cooking for her. She is also an amazing cook. She was engaged to a Korean guy and moved in with her. But all that time, his mom was teaching her traditional Korean cooking. Now I get to reap the rewards. She makes kimchi and kimbap and all sorts of sauces and soups, and then, she's black, we go visit her family and they make us gumbo and fried chicken and barbecue. Life is good with her. And somehow she thinks she's the lucky one. Before her, I had trouble imagining having to spend the rest of my life with one person, even though I wanted a wife and kids. Now I have found someone I get to spend the rest of my life with. When my GF and I matched on Hinge, we talked about F-Zero on SNES, F1 racing and other nerdy things. Then our first date at a brewery was fantastic and she drank as much as I did. When it was time to go, we walked to the car, and she put her arm around my waist and leaned into me. I was already hooked, but that cemented it. When we got to her car, I said, "Hey, I had a great time and I got to be honest right now." She huffed and rolled her eyes. She was expecting rejection, and I said, "I really like you, is it okay if I smooch you?" And then she gave me the best kiss I've ever had in my life. That was almost 2 years ago, and I'm about to go climb into bed next to her. She's so nerdy and kind and wonderful and sexy. I have no idea how I got so lucky. Well, it wasn't a date. But I met this girl in a club one night. I'm a martini lover. So, at some point, she said, "Oh. You got the ICKY martini." And we started a conversation about how some bartenders don't know how to make them properly. And that you're taking a 50-50 chance on what you get, when you go to a club. Sometime later, I asked if I could make her one. She suggested her place. We spent the next 3 days per nights together, screwing our brains out. I mean, literally. 3 days and nights. We would only take a break to shower, eat, and nap a little. We pretty much lived together for 5 years, 3 in San Francisco. Sadly, it didn't end well. But I will always remember that first meeting. And like there was not tomorrow. Met this girl during COVID and started dating but couldn't go on an actual date because restaurants and cinemas were closed. When restaurants started opening again, we immediately went on a date night. Mind you, I already liked this girl, and I guess you could say we were already a couple, but still in the initial phase. When we get to the restaurant, we order drinks and water. When the waiter comes with the water, this girl takes the bottle and starts filling my glass. Guys, my eyes were watering. It was such a simple thing, just filling my glass of water first, without me even asking. But it meant so much to me. Maybe because of the neglect I endured from my narcissistic ex, and I had gotten so used to just giving, and never receiving. I think that's the moment I fell in love with her. It wasn't our first date, we were a year or so into dating at this point. Best friends prior. I don't remember what the conversation was about, my memory is ass, but I do remember we were walking and in reaction to something I said, she stopped, turned to me while looking serious and said, "I'm going to marry the shit out of you." I don't know what it was, but I was taken back. I've never had something so direct yet passionate said to me. It struck me. I'll never forget that. We're going to be married for 5 years, married this year, and no, that didn't make it in the vows, but it did make the proposal. My wife and I met in elementary school and reconnected in our mid-20s. I had the biggest crush on her at the time. For our first time hanging out solo as adults, we walked on the beach on a brisk, clear, fall night. At some point, we laid down on a blanket to look at the stars. She has long hair that goes down her back and I have a crew cut with no hat. Although it was cold, I tried to play it cool because I didn't want the moment to end. Without asking or hesitation, she draped her hair over my practically bald head so that we could both be warm. She was beautiful, kind, and the smell of her hair was intoxicating. Funny thing is that she was fresh out of a LTR and thought we were hanging out just as friends. I, on the other hand, had full intentions of dating her. We've been together for almost 20 years now, married for 15 years. Had our first date years ago. I got to the restaurant like 5 minutes before her and decided to smoke a bit to ease my nerves before I went in. I have 5% tint all around BTW, this comes in later. She pulls up next to me and texts that she just pulled up, meanwhile I'm watching her through my window. Like, is this her? She can't see me at all thanks to my tint, lol. I proceed to smoke and watch as she does her hair, makeup, and curls her eyelashes. I just sat there thinking to myself, ah, that's so cute. She's probably here for a date too. I proceed to text her that I'm walking up now. We both get out of the car at the same time. Stare at each other, and then she freaks out. OMG, were you next to me the whole time? Needless to say, she was embarrassed. I thought it was really cute. We dated for a few months, things took their natural course. I still think about that moment though. My girlfriend always says that she fell for me on the first day we saw each other. We were there as a group of 3, with the third being our mutual friend. I bought everyone garlic fries, and I split it into little cups. She finished hers, and then decided to mess with me and try to take mine. I said, "If you don't stop taking my fries from me, I will toss you into a garbage can," in an obviously joking tone. She said she had a huge crush on me from that day, asked me out 2 weeks later.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.